Prologue. The Soviet Empire is definitely dead. Any self-proclaimed messiah who calls for its resurrection is just banging his head against the wall, Vasily stressed to Robert Lucero as they talked about the former Soviet Union. Vasily was a visiting professor at the University of Moscow. Robert Lucero was a freelance novelist visiting Moscow for leisure. He knew the chief librarian of the University of Moscow, Rodolfo de Azevedo, a Portuguese, and he went there to see him. He met Vasily in the library. The two were seated opposite each other in the library of the University of Moscow, a table separating them. Behind them were thousands of books neatly arranged in shelves, books of all kinds, from architecture to economics, medicine to social sciences. I could not believe it when I read in the papers that Gorbachev had become a president without a country. It happened so fast, Robert said. I wasn't surprised though, said Vasily. His program of glasnost and perestroika could not reform an empire artificially united, with people of diverse cultures, an empire politically and economically bankrupt for more than 70 years of ruthless dictatorship. Vasily could not conceal his disdain for the communist dictatorship which had ruled the former Soviet Union since 1917, when the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin seized power from the Romanov dynasty. Vasily, was democracy really the objective of Gorbachev in launching glasnost? Robert asked. Footnote: Glasnost means openness in contrast to a controlled society. Vasily smiled. If you mean a democracy similar to the United States, or to other Western countries, the answer is no. A big no. And he admitted this several times. He had said that reforms in the former Soviet Union should be confined within the socialist system. That negated the assumption that he wanted to bring Western-style democracy to our country. You see, Robert, communist leaders have also believed in democracy, but they have defined the term in a very different way. For instance, North Korea, which has been one of the most ruthless dictatorships in modern times, has been called People's Democratic Republic of Korea. And the murderous Khmer Rouge, when they ruled Cambodia, called their country People's Democratic Republic of Cambodia. Can you imagine that? Funny, isn't it? In an interview with Katharine Graham of The Washington Post, the Communist Party chief and Soviet Union President Mikhail Gorbachev was asked by Graham why Soviet writers who expressed contrary views were still arrested and jailed, like Sergei Grigoryan and Pavel Rikyan. Gorbachev told her, the most interesting thing that perestroika has demonstrated is that our people, while being firmly in favor of the renewal of society and of change, has firmly expressed the view that changes should happen only within the boundaries of socialism, and on the basis of socialist values. We are going to work within the boundaries of the socialism we have chosen. That is why everything that evokes in people anxiety that someone has tossed up other values including in the ideological sphere, this evokes a critical reaction. That is also the democratic process. Democracy is like that. Graham, Katharine. Talking to Gorbachev, Newsweek, the 30th of May 1988, page 15. If the Western style of democracy was not what he wanted, then what was his objective in launching glasnost? Robert asked. He wanted to reform the Soviet economy. You see, the Soviet Union, though a military superpower, was an economic dwarf since the time the communists seized power. The communist thinking is this: the fear factor will stimulate productivity, intimidate the people, and they will till the soil, run transportation, make economic wonders. That is not the case. The communists have failed to understand human needs, interests and aspirations. People need incentives to work. They want their own houses, lands, stores, cars, factories. But the communist dictum of ownership of the means of production radically opposes and prevents human needs, interests and aspirations. The government owns the land, so the farmer is just a slave. How can you increase agricultural production if the farmers don't own their farms and the crops they produce? More so if the agricultural methods and tools they employ are outmoded. So the Soviet Union, the biggest territory on Earth, has to import food, because it cannot feed its people with its produce. Once you eliminate human incentives, productivity suffers. Don't expect economic miracles in a centralized and planned economy. Robert nodded in agreement to Vasily's statement. Production is dictated by market forces, not by intimidation. Not by the gun, Vasily pointed out. Obviously, Yeltsin believes in a market economy, Robert said. Yes. And I agree with him. But it looks like his economic reforms are not yet appreciated by Russians. I think that an economy which has stagnated for more than 70 years of communist mismanagement cannot be revived in just 1 year. That's asking too much. The Russian road to a free market economy will be long and difficult. But eventually, we will reap the fruits of our labor. And when we do that, those fruits will be sweet. Those fruits wouldn't be enjoyed by the Russians if Gorbachev didn't plant the seeds, Robert said. Gorbachev was one of the planters. There were others before him, great and small, who didn't see the dawn. They dreamed and they died with their dreams. Yes, Gorbachev planted the seeds too. Maybe he planted the seeds of the bean, and thought the fruits would be red. He was surprised that the fruits were white. Vasily grinned. You don't like Gorbachev, do you? Robert asked. No. 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 Vasily protested. I like him as a person. I admire his guts, but not his foresight. He knew that the Soviets wanted reforms, but he saw reforms only within the socialist context. What he could not understand was this: the Soviets saw the possibility of reforms only outside the socialist system. I thought Gorbachev understood that, after Yeltsin was elected president of Russia. Obviously, he did not. Boris Yeltsin, president of Russia, the biggest under the 15 republics under the Soviet Union, won the first free and direct election in Russia with more than 90% of the total votes cast, humiliating Gorbachev's candidate for the post. His term will end in 1996. Dobbs, Michael. Moscow a year later, the Yeltsin magic is gone. International Herald Tribune, the 17th of August 1992, page 5. I admire him for not intervening in Eastern Europe. If Soviet forces intervened in Poland, like they did in Hungary and Czechoslovakia, the Poles would not be free today. The return of democracy to other Eastern European countries would not have happened. Soviet forces invaded Hungary in 1956, and Czechoslovakia in 1968, to maintain their grip on these countries. Yes. I admire him for that, too. Past Soviet leaders imposed their will on other countries, violently interfering in their affairs. The world should credit Gorbachev for not doing that. He could have done it, if he wanted to. Yes, I think so too. But if he did, he would appear inconsistent, since he promised to recognize the right of every country to have its own social option, to choose its own way of developing society. Well, it's good for world peace that he kept his promise. If only for that, you must agree with me that he is a reformer. Oh, yes. If only for that, Vasily said. There was a pause in the conversation. Then, Vasily asked, incidentally, what do you do, Robert? You mentioned a while ago that you're in Moscow for a visit. Just to relax, take the pressures off my back. I'm visiting some friends. What do you do for a living? I'm a journalist, a novelist. What novels do you write? Romances. Historical, socio-political love stories. That's nice. Vasily's eyes widened. It's what the market likes. As you said, market forces dictate production. Vasily laughed. That's very true, he said. You know, the story of your last Tsar has caught my interest lately. You were referring to Tsar Nicholas? Vasily asked. He turned serious when the subject cropped up. Yes. He is the last of the Romanov rulers. I read in an article in the South China Morning Post that his family and 4 loyal attendants were massacred by the Bolsheviks, but 2 of his children survived. Do you think that's true? Vasily was silent. He looked out to the mountains of mainland China, separated by the calm eternal sea from the island of Taipo where the University of Macau is located. Then, he shifted his gaze back to Robert, searching his eyes, trying to determine whether he asked the question with the real intent of knowing the truth. Or did he ask it out of sarcastic curiosity, the question of a doubting Thomas? This is the first time we've met, and I don't want to come off as a crackpot, telling you jokes or fairy tales. But since you asked me that question, and I suppose that you, as a journalist, are eager to know the truth, then I'll tell you what I know, not from the articles I've read, but from personal knowledge. Do you care to listen to an old story with thirsty ears? Robert nodded. What the Bolsheviks did to Tsar Nicholas and his family was a crime against humanity, Vasily ruefully said as he strove to reminisce a tragedy. 74 years passed. End of chapter.